Into this episode of BizJet TV, we're going to talk about a tailwind takeoff mishap that happened on a private jet. The report's just out. This was an incident that happened to a Hawker 800 XP, was taken off from Aspen February 2022. Now, interestingly enough, Aspen is a tricky airport. There's quite a few accidents that have happened there, both on takeoff and landing. So if you are going into Aspen, it's very important for you to either have flown the approach and familiarize yourself in the simulator and understanding, the weather patterns and things like that. In this case, what happened? There was a tailwind reported, and there's a bit of a discrepancy because the aircraft was taken off from runway 33. The wind was 160, 16 knots, gusting to 25. But the tower gave the pilots what's called an instantaneous wind, which was at 180 degrees, 10 knots. Now, the tailwind limitation for takeoff on this aircraft is 10 knots. And the crew were not familiar with the term instantaneous wind, which, by the way, there is no definition by the FAA to explain what an instantaneous wind is. It's just something that they used at Aspen. But, however, with the official wind at 160, 16 knots, gusting 25, and then this instantaneous wind 180 at 10 knots, and the tailwind being at 10 knots, they were right on the edge. And this is where the danger happened. So they start going down the runway. They'd set flat 15 for takeoff, which gave them an extra 800 feet of runway. V1, VR, which is V1 for decision speed. VR is the speed at which you rotate. Pilots pulled back on the yoke, and the airplane would not get airborne. So the captain elected to reject the takeoff. So thrust reversers, idle, thrust reversers, brakes, the usual thing that you do, and the airplane went off the end of the runway. And there's a bit of damage to the aircraft. None of the passengers or the pilots were injured. They got off, but obviously damage to the airplane because it went off the runway into the snow and that. Now, what was the error here? The investigation looked at the aircraft. They saw there were no faults. So it's basically the pilots not being familiar with this term, instantaneous wind. And, when you've got a 10 knot tailwind and the wind is kind of at 10 knots or maybe more, or 9, 10, 11 knots, and you're on the edge there and you're flying out of an airport like Aspen, you really don't want to chance it. Again, I don't know what pressure they were getting from the passengers as far as taking off, because they could have asked for a one-way change, which would have been the best thing to do in a situation like that. So you've always got to be careful. And again, what catches a lot of private jet pilots out is that, the boss in the back wanting to go. And, runway change with traffic inbound, and that will probably mean another 20 minutes, maybe half an hour delay. And as I always say, you're using private jet, you're buying a private jet, you're buying time. But when you're buying time, you want to make sure that you don't compromise safety. And I think that's what happened here. They were pressed for time. They thought, okay, we'll take off from this runway. It's going to get us quicker to our destination. 10 knot tailwind, that's the limit. We'll be fine. We'll select flat 15, gives us a bit more runway. And off we go. They didn't expect what happened to happen. So again, if you're in a situation like this, you really want to be taking off with that wind in your nose, headwind. You don't want a tailwind at that limit. If it had been 5 knots, it would have been okay. But I remember taking off in a 737, which has a 10 knot tailwind limitation as well. And we took off with like 5-6 knots tailwind. And it was tricky with a big airplane like that with just 5 knots on the tail. So, it's just dangerous. It's dangerous, especially when you're taking off and you're operating into airports like Aspen. You've got to really familiarize yourself. Take notes when you're flying in and out there. Use those notes on the next time you go in there. Talk to other pilots that have been in there, in particular with your type of aircraft, and develop a bit of a report about Aspen. And that's what I would always do. Every airport I went into, I had my ABC little notes, and I keep notes on every airport and every tricks of coming into certain airports and whatever. And then I would just brief myself and the other pilot based off of my notes as well, just to help. So you do the standard stuff, and then any other things that you may have information-wise can always help to make the operation safe. So if you're operating into Aspen and that, you're thinking of buying a private jet and you're thinking to operate into these tricky airports, make sure that your pilots are familiar and don't push them. Make sure and underline that safety comes first, and that's really, really important. So, if you haven't done so already, I encourage you to get a copy of my book, The Quantum Economy. It's out. It's about private jets and the economy of the future, trends and stuff like that. There's stories in here of people that have built their businesses using private jets. The story of Sam Walton, Walmart, that's an interesting one. Grant Cardone, Tony Robbins, and others in here. So get yourself a copy. Click on the link below, and you can get a copy with you in the States, Canada, India, Japan, England. You can get a copy online or at your local bookstore. And remember to subscribe to BizJet TV and check out this other video that we did recently about this crash of this Phenom 300 due to icing. And that's all from Fabrizio Poli here on BizJet TV, and I'll see you on the next one.